Welcome to Fiction and Focus, a podcast where we explore the craft of writing without taking ourselves too seriously. I'm Nathan Harms.
And I'm Wesley Watts. Each episode, we'll discuss uplifting topics like the soul-crushing pressure of expectations, the suffocating grip of self-doubt, and the swift kicking unmentionables of rejection.
We'll share our experiences, struggles, and heartaches in the hope that you might find some small measure of comfort in our collective misery, or at least have a laugh at our expense.
So grab a pen, paper, and your favorite writing snack, and join us as we put fiction in focus. Welcome back to Fiction in Focus with your hosts, Nathan Harms and me, Wesley Watts. And what are we talking about today?
We're going to talk about Exposition, which, yeah.
Is that the thing that you get charged with when you expose yourself?
I mean, maybe you do, but, you know, it's been expunged from my record. It's been long enough now. We don't talk about that.
Okay.
Not in this household anymore. You know, you were there. You remember.
I didn't have as good of a lawyer.
Before we get going to that, let's kind of chat about what we've both been working on. And in case it's not obvious, we are both partaking in adult beverages today. Sorry, YouTube sponsors.
Not because it's been a bad day or anything.
No, not at all. But this is our happy place, I guess. What does that say about us, though? I mean, I don't know. Probably positive things, maybe. So, Wesley, what have you been working on besides a drinking habit?
I am still in the pit of working on Choosing Chaos. I got a couple of scenes written down that I was really proud of. So one, actually, I'm not even sure if we already spoke about this last time. I have no concept of time right now.
It's all good.
So remind me if I've already talked about this or if it rings a bell.
I'll cut it out.
You're going to cut it out anyway. Shit.
Right.
I'm going to have like 10 seconds of talking in the whole episode. No, so in Me and the Machine, there's a scene that I was really proud of. It wasn't really that important of a scene, but Gabby and C are at this river, and I just had them talking, and in the middle of it, there's like this solar flare event, which is kind of a dangerous situation for them. Like, not deadly dangerous, but you could get really burned. It was kind of just like this little intimate moment, and I wrote in there some like quirks of C's at the time, knowing kind of what she was thinking. So in Choosing Chaos, I wrote that scene from her point of view to put in there as a flashback, so you get to kind of understand why she did the things that she did. And it was really cool. It helped me like really cement her character in my head again. And because the writing for that's been so sporadic, it's been really hard to capture that character voice.
Yeah.
So my word count's been pretty low, but I am happy with what I've written. Yeah, I guess that's about it. What about you?
Yeah, that's really cool, by the way. We have not spoken. We've spoken about the concept of that, but I didn't know you had actually written it. So that's really cool. And I love that. We talked about it on one of the last episodes as a writing exercise of writing things from other points of view, other characters' points of view and stuff like that. But to actually put that in practice, especially in the sequel, I think that's really, really neat. Was it, before I go into was it cool to revisit that moment, like to reread it and go, wow, I'm really proud of this, and then to kind of dissect it and spin it all back down to almost the starting point?
It was also awful though, and I'm gonna go ahead and give a little bit of a spoiler here. And, I don't think it's that big of a deal. But basically, Gabby goes to C's school to like meet her because she needs a friend to kind of talk about what she's going through. And at this point, Gabby hasn't left the planet. She's basically been offered the assignment by the admiral and that kind of thing. And it's the debate section if you're going to put it into a beat. So she meets C at her school, and C's finishing up wrestling practice. And there's just these little things like she asks her, "Oh, you're going to shower?" And she's like, "No, I just get sweaty again anyway. I'm not going to shower." And from C's point of view, though, she's actually delaying showering and intentionally getting really, really gross. Because when she goes home, there's somebody there abusing her. She's trying to make herself absolutely as, the least attractive she can be.
Ah. Oh,
So there's like
wow.
little moments like that. So it was hard to write, but it was like,
Yeah.
it's a tough
Yeah.
topic, but it's kind of important.
Yeah. To see it through to that, too, that's got to feel really rewarding, I would
Yeah.
think. So.
And I'm trying to balance that line where I want to get across what's happening to the reader, but I also I'm not trying to go into that realm of being visceral about it.
Right.
So it's implied kind of thing without,
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, for me, I am finishing up. I'm 2 chapters away from finishing my next novella, or at least the first draft of it.
Nice.
And I'm excited. It's the 2 hardest chapters to write, which is the last chapter, of course. And then because I'm going to be switching from the main story to these little like short stories in between the chapters, I have like the pivotal big moment that's I need to write a chapter for too. And I have plenty of ideas, but kind of delaying that off for a second or two.
How often do you write these scenes like out of order? Do you go sequentially, like by timeline, or do you?
Normally I do. This is like the first instance really that I haven't. And the only reason is because of the short stories. I'm trying to have them kind of mirror the chapters a little bit with either the moral or the vibe or something. So there's this underlying tone where these 2 friends are going on this journey. And one of them, the ghost, Franklin, he used to hear all these stories from this kid he met who just loved to tell stories. So he's imprinted all these into his imagination. And so as they're traveling versus just they were walking, he like tells a story. And so that was kind of my basis for it. So I'm kind of trying to base the moods of the chapters surrounding the stories versus the other way around. So it's a little bit of an experiment. Cool. We'll see how it goes. It might be hated by all or loved by some, but I'm pretty proud of it. Outside of that, working on Zed and Zia 5, still working on the outline. Had kind of a breakthrough. I did a rough outline of it with my brother, and now I'm sitting down and actually typing up the full thing and really trying to get a really good idea, and then we'll sit down and kind of bounce some ideas off each other. That one is going to be called Zed and Zia and the Whataverse of Weird, which
that was a great title.
Just a great title.
I really like the alliteration with W's there.
Right. We just want people to use the letters they don't use normally. So yeah, and outside of that, I have a meetup date with my writing group. We're going to be getting together here in a couple weeks. We debated on doing a brunch or a evening meetup. We decided to go with brunch because the last time we did an evening meetup, we had too many libations and did not accomplish a whole lot and just had a fun time, which was still really fun. But we all kind of want to get a little bit of gusto out of it. So yeah, so that's what's going on in my neck of the woods. If you're still listening to us, wondering if we're ever going to talk about our topic today,
we're not.
No, it's just going to be this.
I actually sorry not to interrupt. I had one more piece of news that I totally almost forgot about.
Yeah, congratulations.
Well, now way to bury the lead. Indies Today, which is one of the websites that does reviews on mostly independent published books. They released their 2024 Best of the Year awards yesterday, and Me and the Machine was in there under the action adventure category. So I was pretty stoked about that.
Woo! That is great, man. Like any kind of that validation of like, that's awesome.
Well, yeah, I mean,
congratulations. I think, yeah, that's great.
It's much better than like your mom telling you that you love you or something like that. Like,
well, I hear that all the time. Well, maybe. Just kidding. Yeah, that means so much more than that. Well, so we're going to talk about Exposition for people who are maybe just starting their writing career or writing their first book. Wesley, how would you describe Exposition? What exposition would you put on Exposition?
So let's see. Webster's dictionary defines it as. I'm just joking. I don't actually have it up here.
I thought you did.
Oh, fuck, man. This one's so difficult for me because it's not something I really think about
Right.
or structure in my head or anything. But it's really just the information, usually backstory or world building information that you need to get across to the reader.
Right.
It's kind of one of the most difficult things, I think, in my opinion, for new writers to get right.
Absolutely.
And I don't know that it's really teachable or anything like that either. It's kind of trial and error, and you figure it out, and maybe we can give a few tips, but...
Well, and that's why I figured on this episode especially, I want to have that we drink, yeah, that we have a real, just more of a conversation base. So when I did the treatment for this episode, I didn't put too much in there because, like you said, this is a really hard thing to teach because I don't know that there's a right or a wrong. I mean, there is some right and wrongs. There's for sure some big.
There's
right
definitely some wrong.
There's some wrongs, but I think that maybe there's just some helpful tips and tricks, and usually people figure it out on their own. But speaking of right and wrong ways to deliver exposition or info dump, if you will, what are some of the right ways you've seen it done versus wrong ways? Like what's a wrong way? Let's start there. That really irks you. You open a new book, you're excited to read it, and you see that exposition dump. What does it look like where you're just like, ugh?
Yeah, so I would say this is particularly important at the beginning of a book, right?
Right.
And actually, let me get this out of the way first. How much exposition you can get away with, I think, is very dependent on your audience.
Yeah.
Certain audiences you're going to be able to get away with more than others. I read primarily science fiction and fantasy, some horror, some contemporary fiction, that kind of thing. But typically science fiction and fantasy can get away with a little bit more.
Yeah.
That said, I'm particularly put off by it. I think most readers and sci-fi fantasy readers will deal with more exposition than I will.
Yeah.
I will straight up put books down if there's just info dumps, particularly at the beginning. So at the beginning, anything that's not focused on character or isn't very brief. So if you're chewing the scenery or going back, 500 years ago when the dynasty started and, all the dragons came to wherever, I don't need to know that shit.
Right.
I need to know about the characters that we're discussing, the conflict, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's my number one kind of turn off for it, is when it's right away and when it's not really about the character. You can do a little bit. A great example of this is Neuromancer by William Gibson. The first line of his book is, let me see if I can remember this by memory. The sky was the color of television tuned to a dead channel. So it's scenery.
Right.
But it's evocative, and then he quickly gets to the character.
Right.
Also, what I think is cool about that is they would mean very different things now. When he wrote that meant gray and fuzzy, because back then, that was in the 80s.
Right.
Now it would mean blue.
Right.
Now it would mean like a clear blue sky. So
right. It's a nice day out.
Yeah.
That's
so
great.
I've always liked that one, but yeah, get to the characters quickly.
Yeah.
How about you?
So I don't disagree with you. I think you can, I'll say this. I think you can do your info dump, and why a lot of times it's done right off the bat is because it's more forgiving to do the info dump at the beginning of the book versus the middle of the book when people are already invested. Like, I feel like people are more forgiving. Like, they're like, I'll give it a couple chapters. So I feel like as long as your exposition, if you're doing world building up front, we'll do this on the Zed and Zia books a little bit. So the first book, we do a little bit of exposition just to set up the planet, the world, the creatures, and we do it as a prologue. So it's not actually the first chapter. Reason being is because I felt like I needed to build it a little bit and explain, like, that they're 12-inch tall, little one-eyed aliens on the small moon and like stuff like that. But I didn't want it to be chapter 1. In the third book, we do an exposition dump right off the bat again. But what's fun with that one is it goes through this whole thing about building up this mission that they must take on, this thing that they must do. Or is the fourth book? It's the fourth book. And then it pulls back, and basically the prophet Uni, who's been telling them this, has been speaking to the dumbest character the whole time. And he's like, I'm going to have to do that all over again. So, like, bring in some humor into it. Like, I feel like exposition is one of those things that you just want to get it done with. And it sounds really bad because I think you can do it in the fun way and the smart way, and we'll get into some of that later. But I think if you're doing it right off the bat, have fun with it. For the next Zed and Zia book, we have an idea that one of the characters is going to be doing the exposition and kind of break the fourth wall a little bit. And then when the characters are like, "Why are you saying this?" He's like, "Well, it's because I'm going to write a book about all this," and like really get, meta with it. That's in the sci-fi comedy realm, so that's a little bit different. I think you're right that with sci-fi and fantasy, people are more forgiving of it. Having said that, I don't need the Lord of the Rings start at the beginning of every book. Sometimes it's cool to live in the world and then kind of get drawn into it, Oh, hey, look at that.
This is what I was doing. I was grabbing this because you made me think of it.
Great minds.
My copy is so beat up, I've lost the cover. I was looking for it.
That's
I don't see it on the shelf. But yeah, you made me think of something. One, again, we are talking about very different audiences for your Zed and Zia versus like the stuff that I'm reading.
Absolutely.
Different age range, that sort of thing. But also what you made me think of is that when you're introducing something that is very different than what your readers have experienced before.
Right.
I almost said like very different than reality, but that's not true. Like there's somebody that is experienced in reading fantasy. They know what the fucking elf is.
Right.
Unless you're trying to reinvent it. You don't need to explain what a vampire is.
Right.
Unless you're reinventing the definition.
Right.
But at the time of that J.R.R. Tolkien wrote The Hobbit, nobody knew what a hobbit was.
Right. Right.
So the very first part of this is what is a hobbit?
That's so great.
And he spends a couple of pages. Actually, no. It's actually just one page. I remember it being longer.
Yeah.
But he spends a page just explaining what the hell a hobbit is.
Yeah.
But before the start of the book.
See, and I think that is a really cool way to do an info dump is, like I said, like a prologue or something.
Yeah.
Set it up, but then don't expand upon it. That's what I found. That's the thing that I've found is the most off-putting part about exposition that I see, and especially a lot of fantasy writers, is they want to give you 2,000 years of lore.
Yes.
Before they get to even introducing a character, even if it's a passive character who's not going to be there the whole time. And it's really off-putting because unless every single line of that comes back and could never be uttered by another character throughout the entire rest of the book, it will turn off a lot of readers. Especially like you look at a lot of fantasy books and they're like 800 pages, of just they're big boys. And your average reader wants to know if they're going to commit the time to that, unless they're like an avid reader of like that's all they do with their time. They want to know that they're going to be rewarded very quickly by introducing characters and stuff like that. So I found if you're going to do exposition and world building right off the bat, I think it's fine, but I would go brief with it. I love the idea of like, what is a hobbit? One page, I think our prologue was like 2 pages long, is a really short chapter. Throw a joke in there, however you want to do it, but like, yeah, I mean, I like to start most of my books in a moment and then expand around that and through the character's own voice start throwing the exposition.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the
breadcrumbs.
Yeah, I think the worst thing you can do is just spend 2 chapters world building before you get to it. Like that's just. I mean, I might be alone in my principles on that, but I think personally, it's a turnoff for me.
Like I said, I think I'm probably more sensitive to it than a lot of readers. I want to just dribbled in. Like,
yeah, no, I get that.
I'm not trying to read like a thesis or something. Like I just want to.
Yeah.
Thesis.
What do you think?
Word,
what do you think are the best vehicles to deliver? And I think this is the one where most writers get tripped up. So like if you're looking
Right.
at what are the vehicles to bring it in? So obviously it depends on how you're writing the book. If you are writing it from first person point of view, it's actually pretty easy to do exposition. You know, it was a dark and stormy night and I was walking a da 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 da. You can have your character essentially deliver exposition directly to the audience, and you can do it over an incredibly long time, bit by bit by bit by bit, to the point where, because you got to think exposition is only important when you get to the pivotal moment where it matters, right? So if the whole point of your exposition is to get to Act 2, you have all of Act 1 to sprinkle those breadcrumbs in there before it matters, is how I would kind of look at it.
Yeah. I mean, I look at it very similar.
Yeah.
Just as like it's the information that the reader needs to understand what the characters are doing.
Right.
Because if you don't have any background and somebody just does something weird, what the hell?
You have a blind character who runs into a wall, but you neglected to mention the fact that he's blind.
Right, exactly.
Why is John running into walls?
But there's also something to be said for vehicles to use exposition. But I would actually start first with asking yourself, is it necessary?
Yeah.
Because you have this chunk of things that you want to tell the reader. And a lot of times, what I've found when I'm reading, like when I'm critiquing like newer writers, fantasy and sci-fi stuff, what it seems to me, again, it's just my perception of what they're doing, but what it seems that they're doing to me is that they've spent so much time investing in this world, building all the details of this world, all the background, all this stuff. It feels like a waste if you don't put it in there. And I can understand that. It really does.
Yeah.
Like you want that, all that cool stuff. You want to be able to put it in there somewhere, but it doesn't always belong. So I actually have a little bit of an anecdote of this, and it comes from, guess, screenwriting. I don't know if this is actually even a real story. It might just be like one of those urban legend kind of things.
Right.
But I've heard it like several different iterations that basically kind of go the same way. And I think it's kind of a cool example. So the story goes, I think this is in the early 60s. Somebody's making kind of like a big-ish budget film for the time anyway. And it's about like this relationship piece. This man and this woman, married couple, they're arguing in this particular scene. They're arguing in their kitchen. And the original screenwriter had like 10 freaking pages of this argument. And goes all back and forth about all their problems, the backstory of where the problems are coming from, and basically the guy cheated on her, that sort of thing. And it was a really big, important moment. The studio's like, we got to cut this down. This is too long. We need this down to like 2 or 3 pages max. And the screenwriter goes through and chops off a little bit, a line here, a line there, and he's like, I can't do it. I can't get this. Like, I can't even get this to 5 pages. This is just too important. There's no way to cut this down. It has to be this long.
Yeah.
So they go back and forth, and I think it was the director, one of the producers, had this writer sleeping on his fucking couch. And the writer was actually from Germany, I believe it was, or somewhere in Europe, but barely spoke English. So he wrote like German films or whatever. And he's like, I got to get this guy working. Got to get him off my couch. Here, rewrite this. So he gives a script to a writer that barely speaks English, and says, hey, cut this down. So what he ends up doing, this 10-page argument where it's about this man and this woman fighting about his cheating.
Yeah.
They step into an elevator. So they're not even in the kitchen anymore. They just step into an elevator next to each other. Don't say a word. Staring straight ahead. Elevator goes down. Another woman comes in, like a young, pretty woman comes in. The woman steps aside, making room for the woman. The woman gets between them, and he covers up his wedding ring.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
So, my first thought is, whatever exposition you're trying to write in, see if you can cut that out.
Yeah.
And if you can't, if it is necessary information, there's definitely ways to do it. Yeah.
That's a great story. Whether it's urban legend or not, that's awesome. That's like a repeat story of the party or something,
I mean, it's a good lesson, whether it's real or not.
It's great. And it's funny because I think all writers at some point make that mistake with their exposition. One thing I actually did on the first Zed and Zia book is, I'm not going to bring attention to it, but there's a line in there that I put in the exposition of this world building that I was really attached to, and I never mention it again in the next now I'm working on book 5. We're 4 books in, and I never mention it again, and it's like a throwaway line, but it really is. It has a lot of weight within the world building, but it never gets brought up again. It's a funny thing though, because I think you're absolutely right. You get so attached to it, all has to be there, and it feels like you're pulling stuff out. But what I would say, what I found now later in my career, my unpaid career, is that now I look at trying to get through the exposition as best and quickly and efficiently as I can, so I can write dialogue and write characters and fall in love with them. And that's the reward, because that's the part that the reader is going to love. They want to meet so-and-so and their quirky personality, and will they, won't they, or how are they going to get out of this predicament. They don't really care that the moon has been conquered for the last 1,000 years by blind worms, or whatever the kooky thing is.
That is out there.
Yeah.
But if I could give a suggestion, if you're listening to this and you're a new writer and you're trying to figure this stuff out, and you do have some of this stuff, you have a moon that's been conquered by, what was it, blind worms?
Blind worms, yeah.
Did you just pull that out of your ass?
No,
or was that in something?
It was kind of in something, so it's fine.
Okay. Maybe you have your own version of some...
Of blind worms?
Yeah. Something awesome and bizarre like that that you want to leave in, that you really want there to be, you want that to be there for some reason. And that's okay. It is okay to want some of that stuff in there for your readers, even if it doesn't really matter that much. Make it matter.
Yeah.
Make it matter to your character. That is the easiest way. And then either if you're in their head, they can be thinking about it. If you're not in that character's head, one of your other characters can see that their reaction to seeing the moon and the worms squirming on it, or whatever the fuck, whatever, put them in a situation where there's conflict.
Yeah.
And then start talking about it. And then you can keep that in there and actually improve your scene in many cases. Just don't go off for paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs of
exposition. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah. And I think that was going to be my next it's a perfect segue, is characters interacting with each other. So if you write in first person, exposition gets a lot easier because obviously you have your character talking to the audience. But if you're writing in third person, I feel like that's where a lot of people stumble, right? Because the narrator is the writer, and the narrator's voice is trying to deliver the exposition. But instead of doing that, having two characters notice something, see something. And it doesn't have to be heavy-handed. It could be, because you think it as a writer, and I kind of come from this way of thinking when I first started. It's well, the character's not just going to ask the other character, so what's up with that? And they'll be well, because of this, 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 and the other. I'm that's a cheat. It's not, though, because if in real life, if you see something and you don't understand it, and you're with your buddy who does, you're going to ask him, what is that? You know what I mean? You're going to have that conversation. So it's about kind of trusting your characters that they're not going to just accept the world as it is around them, just like the reader isn't going to. So you have those moments between characters, and also that builds a lot of cool moments between characters. You can show their humor, you can show their knowledge, you can show their intelligence or lack thereof, depending on how well they know blind worms.
And you can get creative with that too. You can be the character saw something for the first time, they're going to be what the hell is that? Yeah. If that isn't going to make sense for you, figure out some other motivation. If you really want that in there, if you really or need that information in there, just get creative with the motivation. Maybe one character is trying to stall and doesn't want to go to the next place or whatever, so they're talking about whatever crap just to slow the other character down, and that can become a point of conflict too.
Yeah.
Once that character realizes, hey, you're trying to manipulate me. Yeah, I was giving you all this information thinking that I was helping you out, and you're trying to set me up waiting for somebody coming over here to rob me or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. No, it's a great point. And I'll add to it as well as like showing the personality of your characters. Even if you are writing as the humble narrator and you are the voice of the exposition, and maybe you don't want your characters to always do the heavy lifting because maybe they're unaware of the danger that's coming or something like that. One of the best pieces of advice when I first started is give your narrator a voice that's kind of its own, right? So depending on is the voice grandiose? Are you just presenting facts? Is there humor behind it? It kind of depends on what genre you're writing in, but
absolutely.
like for a lot of my stuff, if I'm going from that narration point of view, I like to have fun with it. Now it's for young readers again, so I think one of the best examples was I was explaining on the third book what this certain thing on the ship did, called, I think it was a floofer feather freaker duster or something. I forgot what it was. I wrote the book. I can't remember what it was. Anyway, it was this really long, almost Dr. Seussian thing, and I was explaining what it was, and then I just kind of stopped as the narrator and said, now before we go on, let's all say it together. Fluffer, floofer, fleefer, fleeter. Isn't that fun to say? Say it 3 times fast. So, like, you can have fun with that kind of stuff, depending on, like, obviously the genre you're
Right.
going in. Like, you can have a wink and a nod to the audience because they know that you have to get through the exposition, and you have to get through the exposition. You don't always have to take it as seriously, would be, a good piece of advice. And then again, this is all genre specific stuff. But then again, you know what? I don't see anything wrong with reading a sci-fi book that has a little bit of a sense of humor about itself. There's
No.
there's nothing wrong with that.
There's some great ones out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
That's kind of one of the quintessential examples, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, there is a ridiculous amount of exposition in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
There is.
But it's told like, it has that almost like Monty Python, that very British humor throughout.
It's almost the point of it. Like, to give the exposition, it's just crazy.
Yeah, and it works. It totally works. It's a great example, but obviously if you were to deliver that like straight face, like it would just be kind of ridiculous. If you didn't have like the little jokes in there of, and the odds were 1 in 5 billion to the 7th power. What what I mean? Like, that's funny. And you're bringing in stuff that's not necessarily important, but it's entertaining. And
Yes.
sometimes you forget the whole point of a book, like this, especially in fiction, right? Is that it's entertainment. It's entertainment in book form. You're typically, if you're going out of your way to read and it's not an assignment from like a class or something, you're doing it because you enjoy to read. So you want to be entertained by it, and it shouldn't feel like, a book report or a lecture to try to set up the world. So yeah, having fun with it would be a good example.
Yeah, I had nothing to add to that. That's perfect.
So we've ran through most of this. I guess kind of the final thing I want to talk about, and look at this, but this will actually be like a normal length episode. Thank you for sticking with us through the Snyder Cut podcasts that we've released recently. Like an hour and a half.
Christopher Nolan directed.
Yeah. So the last thing I kind of want to talk about in today's episode is we finish our drinks and
yeah, I guess we should
continue to be funny.
Finish the episode without finishing our drinks, right?
Oh yeah, no. I mean, if anything, we'll yeah. If you're just listening, just imagine.
That might have come through on my mic.
I don't think it came through on mine, but I'll add some sound effects or something. No, I won't. I totally won't. The last thing I want to talk about is, when do you trust your audience versus when do you lead them? And I think that is the quintessential thing about this topic we're talking about, is as much as we love to build our worlds and talk about them and do all that stuff, it really comes down to trust. Do you trust your writing and your audience enough to read the words that you've committed and understand the story you're trying to tell and be able to see it in their own mind. Because sometimes, and I found this, is that if you're too heavy-handed with your exposition, say for instance you're like the walls were purple of a room, right? But if it has no impact on the story, why are you putting that in there? Because what if the person reading it is imagining the walls as being red? There's nothing wrong with that. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like you don't have to say how tall a character is unless it like has something to do with their characterization, or you can be vague with like how they're dressed or things like that, because a lot of people use exposition to do that. But I guess going back to your point that you had earlier is, what's the point of it? Is it needed? You know, thoughts?
I agree wholeheartedly. Like I mentioned William Gibson a little while ago with Neuromancer.
Yeah.
Phenomenal writer. Basically started the cyberpunk genre on his own. One thing that he did that I kind of couldn't stand is he would describe each character in depth. What they're wearing, what they looked like.
Right.
And it really wasn't necessary.
Right.
In fact, it was counterproductive in most points because I didn't remember it. Like it becomes noise. And I found, like, I loved that book. I read it quite a few times before. Well, not quite, probably twice before I actually started writing myself. And I kind of realized that I didn't remember what hardly any of his characters looked like, but I would remember characters from other books, and I kind of like examined why that was. And now this is a good example. I think I've got it right here. Yes. Just doing show and tell this episode.
I love it.
This is actually the first book I ever owned as my own, like an adult book. I got it at King Soopers, I think. Wait, what was that grocery store? It was King Soopers or Safeway, right by where you live. So yeah, I bought that there, like 13 or 14, and I actually still remember what some of those characters look like.
Yeah,
and part of that's because like it was my first big sci-fi book, and it like sunk in. But other parts of it were how Fred Saberhagen describes his characters. He would give you like one kind of predominant detail.
Yeah.
And then that combined with their personality just kind of filled in all the other blanks, and you're good. You're off to the races. And really, I think that's kind of all you need.
Yeah.
And for side characters, you might not even need that much.
No, absolutely. I think that's the interesting part. My guess is the reason why if you over-describe a character, you won't remember it as well is because that character is no longer yours.
That's an interesting thought.
Because like as a reader, you are creating, even if the writer has created this world, you're creating your own version of it. It's like a cover song of a book. And if you're able to actually wrap your head around, this is how I see the character, it becomes personal to you. If they tell you exactly what the character looks like, it becomes less personal. And that's probably why it means so much to you too, because you built that world. You painted that picture.
Damn, I never thought of it like that. I like that.
Mic drop. No, I think that works on a barrage of levels, you know, within trusting your reader. And I think that's what I was kind of getting around to is you should trust your reader. I think if you're describing something, a place, a thing, if you have 20 things to describe in your book that are really, really important, maybe you'll have 20 sentences worth of exposition in your book, if that makes sense. So by shrinking it down and letting them do the work, I found if I'm describing a character, I give them like a sentence. And that's it. And then, like you said, you throw in their personality, their so on. Where it gets tricky, I think, is if you have a bunch of exposition you need to deliver at once, and so you need to deliver 10 pieces of exposition at one time, it becomes 10 sentences. So then it gets, then all of a sudden you're at 2 paragraphs, and it gets a little trickier. But I think if you kind of keep that rule of thought is how quickly can I describe this at the bare minimum where I'm happy where the picture is painted, but I can trust the audience to fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Great way
exposition.
To tie that together.
Not that hard. Come on, guys. No, I'm just kidding. I fuck up exposition all the time.
It's so easy to do.
Well, because you don't really realize you're doing it till after. Like for me, it's literally after I've released the book, and I'll go back and reread it like a year later and be like, oh, man, look at this tirade this asshole wrote. That didn't need to be there, but like you live with it and you learn, and you just keep going. And that's why every book you write, every story you write, gets a little bit better or worse, depending. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today, Wesley. If people want to pick up your book, how's that website going?
You dick. You know what kind of week I've had. It is. I mean, it's up. You can go to my website, wesleywatts.com. It's old. It's not anything relevant right now.
Hey, maybe by the time this airs, though.
Right. We are about a month behind, roughly, right? So
right.
It'll probably still be just as old as it is now. But we're knock on wood. We'll see.
Yeah.
Or, any of your book retailers that have online stuff.
Yeah. Me and the Machine. Machine.
Right here.
Right there. Yeah. harmspublications.com. It's just going to take you to Amazon. But you can also search any of our book titles and buy them through like Barnes & Noble and stuff like that too. But
if you want to go somewhere different.
Yeah, I get it. But, that's how we do. Or if you live in Colorado, check out your local conventions. We might be hanging out there. You can come say hey. And you can have
earlier in the episode, I gave you the cross streets to Nathan's house. So
Not exact, to be fair. The address is...
It's actually about a mile away or so, isn't it?
Yeah, ish. Yeah. Nah, it's fine. It's fine.
I'll just put this like latitude and longitude up here real quick.
Oh,
that shit.
That's why you subscribe to YouTube, so you can see where we live. Because if you're just listening, this episode probably just seems like pure chaos. It's almost as if we chose chaos. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. Check us out next week where we may or may not have a guest on. Yeah. Have a great day.